Hola, ¿qué tal?
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. There's live on Tuesdays. You know that we are in the Espacio Fundación Telefónica, and I'm going to ask you all to bring out your mobile phones in mute, and to tweet about what's going on tonight. We're here to discover what humanity has been wondering about since the beginning. What is happiness and how to achieve it and how to measure it. There are experts in happiness, indeed, and there are some countries that are happier than others, and we're going to talk about it today because we talk in Spain a lot about that. We are used to saying that there's no other place in the world where you can live as you live in Spain, but the ranking of the world says that Denmark, Norway, and Finland are the happiest countries in the world. This year, Finland is considered the happiest country in the world, and Spain only ranks in the 36th position. So let's see if we can find a recipe today, some trick that we can all do in our day-to-day lives in order to become happier. And for this, we have here two experts in happiness. I have to say that to celebrate the World Day of Happiness, that is on the 20th of March today, I've been speaking with these two experts, and I have found out certain very interesting things that they're going to tell us about today. And I've learned how to say the name of our first speaker, Ragnhild Bang Nes. Ragnhild, did I say that right? Ragnhild Bang Nes. Ragnhild Bang Nes, she's a senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and she's an expert in happiness. And this might make us wonder what a country that has a senior researcher in happiness is like. She's one of the people who's most informed about this topic in the world. So let's start with our first speaker of the evening, and please tweet away and pay a lot of attention. We're going to come out of this session much happier than we are now.
How are you today? Good? I have been given a very challenging task to tell you about what happiness is and how to measure it. And I guess happiness probably is brain chemistry and neurophysiology that feels like magic. But if I asked you, each and every one, I guess you would give me very different answers to what happiness is, flavored by, your personal history or cultural connotations. I looked up this list from the UK, listing up the 50 most happiness-inducing activities you could make. And on top of that list was feeling the sun warm your face. The second one on the list was going to bed in really clean, fresh sheets. And a bit further down that list was, that relief when you've eaten far too much and you just pull off your jeans, your tight jeans. All these experiences are quite pleasurable or pleasure-oriented. They feel very nice. But they are very transient. They don't really last, not sustainable. So they are we're using them up as we are experiencing them. As when we have a piece of delicious chocolate cake and the first piece is lovely. The second serving is maybe not so lovely, and if we have to eat the entire cake, it's actually rather sickening. Pleasures are very important for us, and they are healthy. But in general, happiness research is defining happiness as presence of positive emotions and the absence of negative emotions, well-functioning, and this overall evaluation of life as good. And I guess that across different nations and people, this experience of deep contentment, serenity, harmony, being calm is very close to what most people think about when they reflect upon happiness. And also these experiences of, having a purpose in life, having meaning, being part of a community, or maybe a family, feeling attached, being connected, taking part, sharing, joy and cheerfulness with your network, with your friends, and also experiencing love, closeness, intimacy. But happiness is also often related to these other types of well-functioning type of emotions or experiences, such as, feeling interest in life, being absorbed, fascinated, engrossed in something, really, really fascinated. And then also about managing to do something that's very difficult, that feelings of mastery. Or indeed also about achievement, reaching a goal that you have aspired for, worked really hard to reach. But also often about, these experiences progressing towards that aim or that goal, Development, getting closer to achievement. And some of these experiences are not really pleasurable at all. In fact, they can be rather painful, demand a lot of effort. So I guess happiness is sort of both well-being or well-staying, these experiences where you sort of reach the goal, or you're really content, you're sort of resting in that space or that emotion, and about well-moving, progressing towards the aim, having a purpose, developing, and sometimes about both well-staying, well-being, well-moving. I was recently on my way to Turkey for a happiness seminar, and I had some time to wait in the airport, and I was looking up these happiness citations, and this one really struck me. To watch the kites soar in the clear blue sky. And it reminded me of being in New Delhi for some reason. And I used to go to Delhi quite often, but it was just a sort of transit place. I was coming from somewhere and going to another place. But I stopped for a day or two, and it reminded me of watching the kites rise from the rooftops in New Delhi before sunset, and just being there and really enjoying staying and looking back on where I had been and enjoying the journey and looking forward to where I was going next. So this feeling of sort of being a center in my universe or my narrative and being connected with my past and my future and enjoying just being where I was. So I think, to me, happiness is sort of this vast and varied, multifaceted internal landscape, colored with your personal history and all these cultural connotations. And then it is very related to the external conditions. And if we study definitions of happiness in different languages, or the root of the words referring to happiness in different languages, what turns out is that happiness is often related to these external conditions, or experiencing good luck, good fortune, feeling blessed, having resources. And even Aristotle would acknowledge that it is evident that happiness stands in need of good things from outside, as we have said, for it is impossible or difficult to do fine things without resources. So how do we measure this sort of experience or landscape, this internal, external, moving, staying, emotional and non-emotional experience? We can ask people, of course, and often happiness is measured asking people about their overall satisfaction in life or with their life. How satisfied are you with your life? And the World Happiness Report and a lot of other studies are based on this question. Assume that this ladder is a way of picturing your life. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom part, the worst possible life for you. So indicate now where on the ladder you are at present. So if you do that, you know, think about your life just now and do that exercise. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you evaluate your life? How many of you are scoring 5 or more on the scale? A lot of you. And you could answer that question very, very fast. So certainly, you're not adding up everything of importance in your life, summing up all the important things and people and activities and situations, your past, your future. You can answer this question very fast, and most people can. So it's partly based on your personality, maybe, or just having an inner measurement device. And what is a 9 for one of you might be a 6 for another. There's a lot of limitations associated with these subjective measures. People tend to be happier on Saturday, so if we ask them on a Saturday, they will be happier than on a Monday. And if we ask questions on depression or satisfaction with income before we ask about happiness, people will respond less happy. So obviously these questions are likely to introduce problems in a way, but a lot of other measures used previously have inferred happiness from objective information on life expectancy or household income. So at least you asked, which is a very important part of citizenship and a human right in a way. And actually, questions like these correspond quite well with other types of emotional questions. They correspond well with other reports. They correspond fairly well with even measures of smiling or biochemistry or neurophysiology. So they do measure something of importance to how your life is going. But they are very crude. Other measures used, like the Better Life Initiative or Social Progress Indicator, will combine subjective questions and objective information on income or other parts of, you know, your life and living standards. But they are still, most of them, very crude. So when we are rating countries in their happiness and well-being, it is very crude rankings, very little information made. In Norway, we have had a lot of initiatives the last few years on measurement of well-being, perhaps partly after we introduced the Norwegian Public Health Act in 2012. And this act places the responsibility for mental health and well-being on the political leadership in the municipalities, and gives the state authorities the responsibility for coordination and supervision. So the local municipalities are responsible for tracking how people are doing. And in 2015, the Ministry of Health commissioned a strategy on how to obtain and disseminate information on quality of life in the population, to follow development and also the distribution of happiness, and to aid in policy making and decision making. And in 2016, we published a paper, or a big report actually, on the problems with the Norwegian quality of life data. We do have a wealth of register data in Norway. A lot of information on how people's lives are faring in objective terms, but we do lack a lot of information on subjective measures. And in August this year, we had another white paper underscoring that we need better indicators of quality of life so that the individual sector and the society at large can evaluate measures with regard to how they promote or inhibit quality of life. Regular data collections on quality of life throughout the population will be an important tool to examine progress. So in this work that we are about to publish next month, we are focusing on the need for nuanced data. We need to ask people about their meaning in life. If they are in need of public services, if they feel respected, if they get the help they want, if they are trusting the institutions, the people around them, if they feel belonging to the communities. All these important aspects or components of happiness. And then we need to combine these subjective data with the objective information, because it's when we combine the subjective and objective information that we get this unique platform for policy making. So we cannot really measure your personal idiosyncratic happiness. But we can measure components of happiness, and it does not have to be perfect to be useful. For some reason I went too fast there. So what we do need to do is, of course, to try to make a happiness habitat, to create good societies, because what really matters is how people's lives are faring. We need to make a foundation for happiness, for good lives, for default contentment. And we cannot prescribe happiness, because life is influenced by so many factors. We're all exposed to traumas in life. We're exposed to death of loved ones. In every given year, about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 in Norway will experience 2 or more traumatic life events. 30% of the population will fulfill criteria for mental disorder. So we cannot prescribe happiness, but we can make lives better. This mosaic of life we all experience, and having good conditions to live in will clearly make life better. People will always fare better when inequality is low, or when we have trust in communities, or when we feel belongingness. And this is what we can measure, and how we can provide better opportunities for people. And we do need to know who are faring worse. How is development going? Who are falling behind? In Scandinavia now, we have a lot of teenagers and young women experiencing or reporting excess risk of mental health problems. They report depression, they report stress, and also an incredible increase in health service use. We need to understand the mechanism behind this. We need to understand how to deal with these problems. And we also need to find out how we create better lives. Who are thriving the most? How can we contribute to good cycles for people to have good lives? And we do need to understand where we are now, and also to look back on where we have been and evaluate those changes we've been through, the interventions that we have initiated, the measures we have been initiating, and also the effect of social and demographic changes. And then we need to prepare for the future and identify the problems that lies ahead so that we can make better lives for all, and maybe even, you know, do as well as Finland in the next happiness report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's for you. Hemos aprendido bastantes cosas.
We have learned quite a few things now, and there are still many things to learn today about what Norwegians do to increase their levels of happiness. And we will hear now the tricks that Meik Wiking will explain in a minute. Our second speaker, I'm sure many of you know him, know the books he has written. This is the first book he wrote. It's a totally bestseller, Hege, The Happiness in Small Things. And our next guest, Meik Wiking, has decided to travel around the world to find the happiest people in the world. I'm sure we can have some discoveries here. I see many happy and smiling faces now, and now we're going to welcome, please put your hands together for our next guest today in our Life on Mars on Tuesdays, Meik Wiking.
Gracias, Marta, y gracias a todos para venir.
Thank you everybody for coming. I'm from Denmark, but I can speak a little bit in Spanish. I've learned Spanish for 2 years at school, and I lived in Spain for 3 months, 18 years ago, at a village near Jaén that is called Baeza. But in order to explain more complicated things like happiness, I have to switch into English, okay?
The Happiness Research Institute in Copenhagen, and we are a think tank that is essentially interested in answering 3 questions. We try to figure out, like my good Norwegian colleague, Ragnhild, how to measure something as difficult as happiness. Secondly, we're interested in understanding why are some people happier than others. And ultimately, we hope to understand how can we improve quality of life. How can we create these good conditions for people to flourish? Quite difficult questions. It's also why I'm going gray in my 30s, or as I like to call it, executive blonde. But I wanted to talk today about a little bit about the political context that we see globally with happiness and politics. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about why it is that the Nordic countries are often doing well in these happiness rankings. So if we look at politics and happiness, these are very exciting times. Back in 2011, the UN passed a resolution on happiness. So it basically asks all countries of the world to focus more on happiness and well-being and see what they can do in order to improve quality of life. They also asked for an International Day of Happiness. That's why we're gathered here today on March 20th. But also importantly, they commissioned the World Happiness Report, which have now been published 6 times, as Ragnhild mentioned last week, where Finland came in top. The inspiration for the UN came from Bhutan. So how many of you have heard of Bhutan? Quite a few of you, very good. Those of you that haven't, one of the things that are interesting about Bhutan is that they, since the beginning of the early 70s, have navigated from what they call gross national happiness. So instead of focusing on gross national product, are we getting richer? The country focuses on, are people getting happier? So every political decision is based on, is this going to improve quality of life for our people? And it's Bhutan that put happiness on the agenda for the UN. But we also see European countries, European governments, embracing these new measures of progress. I think in Europe it's actually the UK government that, at least in rhetoric, have gone the furthest in terms of saying we're not only focusing on standard of living, but we're focusing on quality of life. And every year they're also conducting large-scale and quite fine-grained studies in the UK to see where are people more or less happy. One of the most recent initiatives comes out of the United Arab Emirates. So back in 2016, Uhud Al-Rumi was appointed Minister of State for Happiness. So her job is to get the UAE to top 5 in the World Happiness Report by 2021. I think they're currently ranking around 20th place. It's quite ambitious. And I think there are several reasons why we see more and more governments interested in these well-being measures. One of the reasons are, let's have a scientific approach to understand how to create good conditions for good lives. I think another reason is that there is an increasing recognition that the way we've been measuring progress is incomplete. Traditionally, we measure progress in terms of wealth, in terms of GDP per capita. And this graph shows the economic development in Egypt leading up to the Arab Spring in 2011. And if we only look at whether people are getting richer, things look fine. People increased their average income of 33% in that 5-year period. So things were looking fine. But if you look at the amount of people that felt that life was good, that life was thriving, or they were thriving, the amount of people dropped to 1/3 of what it used to be. So a lot of well-being measures are better indicators of where the public are and the sentiment of the people. And I think that's why we see more and more countries embracing these methods. I think another reason is that more and more people are also feeling that we have gotten a lot richer over the past few decades, but haven't become happier in the same time. And I think South Korea, in many ways, is the poster child of that feeling that a lot of people are having. So this is what Seoul in South Korea looked like in 1960. I was there last year. Now it looks like this. It's been an incredible growth in terms of living standards. Very good results in terms of tertiary education, in terms of GDP. But they are really struggling with converting that wealth into well-being. Massive challenges in terms of pressure on people in general, pressure on young people in particular. They have the highest suicide rate in OECD. They have a non-existent work-life balance. And interestingly, the country we get most visits from at the Happiness Research Institute is South Korea. Because they're recognizing that the way we've been designing policies, the way we've been organizing society, is perhaps not leading us in the right direction. So I remember one editor said to me earlier, we've been looking at the US as the big role model, that's where we wanted to go. And now we're thinking maybe we should change path a little bit. So he was on a tour of the Nordic countries to see what could he take back as inspiration. As Ragnhild mentioned, the Nordic countries are usually doing quite well in the World Happiness Report, together with Switzerland, the Netherlands, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Those countries are usually competing in the top 10. As Ragnhild also mentioned, this is one dimension of happiness. It's overall life satisfaction. And of course, the headlines are Finland is now the happiest country in the world. But I think it's important to remember that these rankings are based on averages. So we can also turn it around and say the Finns are the least unhappy, right? Because it's averages that we focus on. What you'll also see now in the future years is more nuances in these rankings, because one thing is the average, another thing is the distribution. What is the inequality when it comes to well-being in a country? Are a lot of people concentrated around the national average, or are a lot of people a lot happier and a lot of people a lot unhappier than the national average? That is what we're going to see. We've been looking at what explains why some countries are happier than others in these rankings. And we can actually now see that we can explain around 75% of the differences, the variance between the countries. And we can with relatively few factors. So yes, we can see on average, richer countries are happier. Yes, we can see if there's a larger social support in the public, if there's a larger level of generosity, people are also happier. If people live longer, they're also happier. But I think for the Scandinavian case, or the Nordic case, what is to be said about these is that all the Nordic countries do well on all of these. Trust is often also mentioned as the sort of natural resource of the Nordic countries. There's a high level of trust in all the 5 Nordic countries. And you measure trust, which is also a difficult phenomenon to measure, by different things. You can go around asking people, do you feel that most people can be trusted? Or can't you become too careful when it comes to strangers? And in the Nordic countries, 3 out of 4 would say yes, you can trust most people. The average, the global average, is 1 in 4. And they do that because they experience that you can trust people, you can trust government, you can trust companies. There's not so many contracts being conducted among Danish companies as global. But you can also do sort of trustworthiness studies that show there's a link between how much people trust other people and how much they can be trusted. So scientists have gone around in cities in Europe and in the US and taken a wallet with some cash and some ID papers and dropped it, and then see how many of the wallets are returned with the money intact. How many wallets do you think globally is returned with the money intact? How many do you think? 25%? Less? 10%? 5%? Okay. 50%? 75%? All right. 50% of the wallets are returned with the money intact. In Norway and in Denmark, all of the wallets were returned with the money intact. It's also why a lot of tourists, when they're in Copenhagen, they notice that the children, they sleep outside in strollers. We park them outside the cafes when we're in having a cup of coffee, because we think that nothing is going to happen to them. So I think it's fun to see manifestations of trust in that way. But I think what is also interesting with the Nordic case is I think they are relatively good at creating good conditions for good lives. I think they're relatively good at converting wealth into well-being by investing in community, by investing in quality of life for all. So a lot of journalists, and especially American journalists, will say, how can you be so happy in the Nordic countries? You pay so much in tax. Which is true. We do. I pay around 50% of my income in tax. But I, together with 9 out of 10 Danes, say we're happily paying our taxes. There's also a low level of corruption, which means that what is paid into the public pool gets delivered back in terms of quality of life, in terms of free university education, in terms of universal health care, and other things that matters more to people's quality of life than having more money and buying a bigger TV. So I think, for example, in Copenhagen, there's been a lot of investment in cleaning up the water in the harbor, which means that people could go swimming in the summertime. And in all fairness, summer lasts about 1 or 2 days, and then it's back to winter. But those days are really amazing. And I think it's an example of one of the things that also works in the Nordic countries is that they have removed the price tag on happiness. And what I mean by that is that whether you are rich or poor, you will be able to enjoy a relatively high level of quality of life. Whether you're rich or poor, you can swim in the harbor. Whether you are rich or poor, you can cycle around Copenhagen. And I think there's a comfort in that. I don't own a car because I don't need a car. I cycle everywhere. So whether I lost my job and all my income tomorrow, I could still move around Copenhagen the way I move around today. So they invest in good conditions for good lives. They invest in infrastructure that creates happiness. So because of all the investments, for example, in infrastructure around cycling and pedestrians, it also explains why we see this picture when we look at how much do people exercise on a weekly basis. And if we look at how many people exercise more than 5 hours per week, you'll see that Norway and Denmark and Sweden are at the top of the list. Not because we enjoy the gym, but just because we get exercise into our daily commute. So the majority of people in Copenhagen, they cycle to work. The students cycle to universities, but also the majority of members of parliament, they cycle to parliament. And it also creates a sort of a level of equality among people in traffic. Whereas in other cities, if you only invest in infrastructure for cars, you're basically telling people that do not own cars that they're second-rate citizens. So investing in cycle and pedestrian infrastructure, I think, is key. We can also see the importance of equality when it comes to happiness. And there is a large level of equality in the Nordic countries, between rich and poor, between men and women. We haven't gotten into the goal yet, but I think we're doing relatively well. And there's a huge number of studies that will show you that inequality has a negative effect. Negative effect on well-being, negative effect on crime rates, on mortality, on obesity, and so on. But I don't want to show you graphs. Instead, I want to tell you a little about one of the, I think, most interesting and fun studies on the effects of inequality that have come out in the past few years. So a group of scientists have looked at this phenomenon called air rage. I'm sure you're familiar with road rage, when you're driving a car and somebody cuts you off and you become angry. That's road rage. Air rage is when passengers on planes misbehave. So if one passenger tries to strangle another passenger, or there was also a story of one guy removing his pants for the entire flight for some reasons. So they've been looking at under what circumstances do people or do passengers engage in air rage. They've looked at flight delays, they've looked at the size of the seats, and they've also looked at whether there is a first-class cabin on the flight. If there's a first class as part of the cabin, then there is inequality on the plane. Somebody's sitting more comfortably than I am, somebody's having champagne. I'm not. They see that if there is a first-class cabin on the plane, there's a twice as high likelihood of an incident of air rage if there's no first-class cabin. And to be honest, when I first heard this, I thought, well, it's because there's only on the long flights where there is a first-class cabin. But they also looked at how do people board the planes. And essentially, you can board planes in two ways. You can board it in the middle of the plane, and then if you're in monkey class, you go right, and if you're in first class, you go left. Or you can board it at the beginning of the plane, and if you're in monkey class, you walk through first class, and you see their faces, and you see the champagne, and you see the seats. And in those circumstances, when they board it at the front of the plane, there's a twice again high likelihood of air rage. Inequalities lead to frustration, to resentment, and in some cases to air rage. I also wanted to talk a little bit about freedom. We can see being the captain of your ship, of your own ship, being sort of able to choose the course in life that you want, of course, matters to happiness. All of the classical rights in terms of freedom are good for well-being. Oops, sorry. But what I want to show you is that freedom also has something to do with what conditions we create for our families. Is there childcare, or do we not provide anything that supports families? And we can see the impact of that when we compare parents to non-parents. So people who have kids to people that don't have kids. And if we look at life satisfaction, for instance, among Americans, we can see that Americans who have children are 12% less happy than Americans without kids. Denmark is sort of middle of the way. In Norway, Sweden and Finland, parents are happier than people that don't have kids. In Portugal, and especially in Spain, people are happier. Parents are happier. So is it because Spanish kids are nicer than American kids? Might be the case, but of course it's because in the UK, in the US, there is not so many good conditions for being a family. Sweden and Norway have better family conditions often than Denmark does. That's why Sweden and Norway are further up here. So they're creating family-friendly policies that impact how parents feel about their lives. I think the reason why we see Portugal and Spain so high up in the list is that you are better at expanding the team of adults that are taking care of the kids. I think you're better at incorporating the grandparent generation in bringing up the kids. Sometimes it's not because people have a choice, because there's a lack of subsidized childcare. And we can also ask the question, how does this affect the grandparent generation? Right? But I think the takeaway from this is that we should all give our kids Scandinavian policies and Spanish grandparents. So what I wanted to end with was that I mean, this is all life satisfaction, but as Ragnhild mentioned, we can also see some more transient moods, how we feel on a day-to-day basis. And I encourage you all to check out and even download the app from Happiness, which is a project under the London School of Economics. So more than 65,000 people in the UK have signed up for this, and they're asked several times a day, or at least once, how happy they are. But also, what are they doing? Who are they with? Through those activities, they can see that when people are in the countryside, they report higher levels of happiness. When people are having the weekend, they're reporting high levels of happiness, as mentioned. They could also see that last year, the happiest day in the UK was Christmas Day, and already revealed what was the unhappiest day, and that was, of course, November 9th, because we woke up and Donald Trump was president. But I think it's really exciting that we can see effects of global political events when it comes to happiness. But there's also the reverse causation. When we look at what predicts whether an existing government regains control, life satisfaction is actually a better predictor of their share of votes. Better than employment, better than growth. And I think and encourage more and more governments to embrace these well-being data. I think what Ragnhild is doing right now in Norway, having that biannual survey of life satisfaction would be a tremendous accomplishment. I would wish something like that in Denmark as well. Those were the prepared words. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
In a few minutes, we're going to start our debate with our two guests. And before we do, this is a magic trick that we have to make some chairs appear here behind me. And I would like to ask Enrique Flores before we start. That was really fast. Well, we're still missing a chair. But as you know, Enrique Flores is our drawer. And while our guests were delivering their speeches, Enrique Flores was actually taking the minute from the speeches. So I'm going to leave my notebook here. So we had Enrique here. He doesn't just draw the speakers, but as you can see, I'm going to sit down so you can see it well. He writes down what they explain to us. So in a few minutes he has devised a guide to happiness. So I would like to ask you for a big applause to Ragnhild Bang and Meik Wiking, and I will ask them to join me here to have our panel. And I remind you that you can tweet your answers. You have interpreting at hand, which is going to make you happy too. And I'm asking you to tweet away, because on Tuesdays we're not allowed to ask right away. We need to use a hashtag, except 3 people who are 3 young people and who will help us today to understand what happiness is like in different generations. We have our Martianas, our Tuesday guests. They have their microphones at hand, and I'm sure they have several questions to ask. But before that, I would like to ask Meik and Ragnhild about the difficulty of measuring happiness. Some skeptical people might ask how you can really measure that. That is something that is so elusive. Sometimes we don't even know that we are experiencing happiness. We can measure depression and we can measure anxiety. Therefore, we should be able to measure happiness, which is what you do professionally, isn't it? Meik, what would be your answer?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that there is so much skepticism about our ability to measure happiness. I think Ragnhild did an excellent presentation on how we can do it. Yes, it's flawed, but it still gives us an indication of where people are, and it still gives us valuable information. And like you say, well, we try and understand and approach other subjective complex phenomena like depression or anxiety or stress. All of those phenomena, including happiness, is about how we feel as individuals. And I think that's what matters. What matters is whether Marta thinks she's happy or not. That's what we should give some value. And we didn't have so much time to go into it here, but for example, the Mappiness study is also one of the interesting studies where you follow people over time and can see how changes in life circumstances impact happiness levels. And to me, that's the gold standard. One thing is to ask people around the world how happy they are, and then see what are the factors that explain why some people are happier than others. And we can see, for example, people who are in a relationship, people who are married are happier, but we can't necessarily say, are people happy because they are married? Or is it the case that people who are happy have a bigger likelihood of getting married? But you can do that when you follow people over time. And they've done that in the UK, they've done that in Germany, followed tens of thousands of people to see, how does changes in those life circumstances impact happiness levels. And yes, they can see when people get married, there is an increase in happiness. It sort of slowly sets over time. But they can also go back and see in the beginning of the study, those people that got married over the next 20 years, they were also on average a little bit happier.
Es muy interesante que algunos...
It's very interesting. Some skeptical people say that, how can you measure something that is just a perception, the way we perceive happiness? But at the end of the day, this is what really matters, the way we perceive if we're happy or not, isn't it?
I think to measure happiness, that personal or multifaceted, unique, idiosyncratic type of feeling, we can't sort of capture that in our measurement systems. But we can measure nuances of people's experiences. We can ask people about how they feel about their lives, about how much happiness they experience, how much joy, autonomy, freedom, if they feel safe in the neighborhoods. All these drivers of happiness, maybe, or components of happiness. And I think it's very important to not measure happiness because it seems so elusive or so impossible to sort of capture and grasp, because it's, as I said earlier, that it's sort of so useful despite not being perfect, and it's so important to contribute to good healthy lives. We have in Norway struggled a lot with concepts. We are not talking about happiness. We're talking now about quality of life. And to a certain extent, we're talking about happiness and living standards in a way, in sort of a combination. And we've been very focused on using words that sort of resonates across sectors in Norway. And I sort of come from the health sector, and you know, health is not made in the health system in Norway or elsewhere in our part of the world, at least. Health is built where people live their lives. In the kindergarten, in the schools, in the streets, at work, in the gym. So to create better health, we sort of need to work across sectors, and we need to have words or constructs that sort of everyone has a share in. Because if we talk about mental health, it's sort of the Ministry of Health. If we talk about thriving, it's perhaps the educational sector, but quality of life is something that, you know, across the different directorates or ministries or NGOs or people or nations can sort of accept as something they are sort of working on or should contribute to. So we rarely use the word happiness, actually. But it's what we actually are doing in a way, or measuring. Yeah.
Está claro que en vuestros dos...
It's very clear that in your two countries, in Norway and in Denmark, also in Finland, there is a political will and interest about the well-being of the population, of happiness. But we're living here in Spain, so the question is, how can you import that model to a country such as Spain, where we still do not have this awareness about the importance of happiness or the life standards or the quality of life? Because I cannot imagine a public health ministry department that focuses on happiness, or an institute like that of Meik's. What can we do to convince our politicians about that?
I mean, don't beat yourself up too much. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, you are ranking 36 out of 156 countries. You're in the top 40. Okay, and obviously there are challenges in Spain with unemployment, youth unemployment especially. Perhaps also the corruption level here is higher than in the Nordic countries. So there are obvious ways to improve. I think the first step is basically to, like Ragnhild is trying to do in Norway, to start measuring. Because I think what we measure matters, because once we start to measure something, we become more aware of it. So recently I've started to track how many steps I walk every day because of the health app on the phone. It means I walk more. So once we recognize that what we measure matters, we should measure what matters. And what matters to people is quality of life. And also, if we don't measure something, we can't manage it. And I think that's what we're trying to bring to the table, an evidence base on how to most cost efficiently improve quality of life for people. So I think that's a natural first step, to have measures that can help us make better political decisions that will have an effect on well-being of the people.
Porque además...
Because when a country is happier and the quality of life is better, even if it's only from a pragmatic viewpoint, we should tell our politicians that everything gets better. The country works better, economy improves, relationships with other countries work better.
Yeah.
See, así es. Maybe that's the way to convince them to care about it.
Clearly, I think obviously, like Mike was talking about, you know, that measurement and how it provides some guidance and attention to well-being and happiness is a way to sort of create interest. But I think the benefits, I mean, obviously well-being or happiness is a sort of shared human value, but I think also the change in a number of countries and the Nordic countries includes also realizing the sort of benefits that positive emotions or positive sentiments has. We do have a massive problem with health and mental health, like elsewhere in the world. You know, in a lifetime, I mean, 50% of us will qualify for a mental disorder, and we can't treat our way through these problems. And sort of realizing that positive emotions are associated with better health, most perhaps immune system functioning, cardiovascular problem. That positive emotion is associated with better health behavior. People who are happy, they run more, they eat healthier, they smoke less, and they also live longer. And people with positive emotions, they tend to be more innovative. So realizing the benefits, and that is actually impossible to sort of treat our way through all the obstacles and problems and illnesses, and particularly the mental illnesses. We have to promote and build resources to tackle the difficulties in life. We have to build a healthy population and promote well-being as a way of preventing mental illness and other types of obstacles.
Ahora que hablamos de las...
Now that we're talking about mental health, I'm going to take the time to make the question that Inés de Sastre has asked. I heard that Finland is one of the countries with the highest rates of suicides. How does that combine with such high rates of happiness?
The suicide rates. The countries that have the highest suicide rate in the world are Sri Lanka, Guyana, Lithuania, South Korea.
And Finland.
Finland has, okay, so the suicide rate in Finland is around 14 per 100,000. In Sri Lanka and in South Korea, it's about 30. Denmark is around 9, I think Norway is a little bit higher. So when you look at the OECD levels, suicide levels in Denmark and Norway and Sweden are actually lower than the OECD average. We used to have really high suicide rates. So if you take the case of Denmark, back in 1980, the suicide rate was 3 times higher than it is today. It used to be around 30 per 100,000. It has dropped to a third of what it used to be because of more focus on mental health, on better prevention infrastructure, but also through removing toxins from some gas by not allowing people to buy pills or 300 pills and only have a maximum of 60 pills. So a lot of different initiatives have reduced the suicide levels. I think we can do a lot more. And one of the reasons why Finland score a little bit higher in the suicide rates than some of the other Nordic countries is also they have a higher level of weapons at home. There are more hunters, therefore they have more weapons. And unfortunately, that's a very efficient tool. But I think more and more countries are doing more, focusing on mental illness, in part because they're recognizing the economic benefits that comes from investing in mental health. So I think it's really interesting to look at the UK, which have passed a bipartisan bill that gives free psychotherapy to people. Because they run the numbers on it, and for every pound they spend on this, they get £2.5 in return. Because people stay in the labor market. They don't occupy so much the healthcare system, not just the mental health care system. So it's a great investment, and more countries should look towards this and invest more in mental health, try to reduce the stigma around mental illness as well. And it's interesting, another nuance that often comes up in these talks is that a lot of the Nordic countries, or a lot of the countries that do well in the happiness rankings, they also have a high consumption of antidepressants, which is true. It's Iceland, Australia, the UK, Portugal, UK, and Denmark. I think they're in the top 7 in terms of consumption of antidepressants, which could look like a paradox. They're one of the happiest countries, and they also have a high consumption of antidepressants. The thing is, if you look at which countries are at the bottom of the list when it comes to consumption of antidepressants, you will see countries like Hungary and South Korea. Are people in Hungary and South Korea not depressed? Yes, they are. They're just not getting treatment. Those countries are having some of the highest suicide rates in the world. So I think there are a lot of nuances in this. Being a country that recognizes mental illness, reduces the social stigma around mental illness, subsidize treatment around mental illness, I think that's a good thing. So I think there's a lot of nuances in this.
Yeah, about Finland and the suicide rates. In Norway we have about 11 per 100,000, which is the European average. But I think people tend to think that the Scandinavian countries have much higher rates, maybe because they tended to. I think some places in Finland, actually, it is 35 per 100,000 in some remote areas. And there's probably also a combination of mental health problems, access to weapons, but also a binge drinking culture. So a lot of people have been drinking before committing suicide. So you have that combined sort of effect. But obviously we can do a lot to sort of reduce the suicide rates. But I think that, and also the prevalence of mental disorder, but clearly mental disorder also is something we probably have to live with to a certain extent. I mean, there are genetic factors involved, and life is very challenging. I mean, we cannot immunize us against, you know, the ups and downs and the disasters in life. You know, we lose our health, and we lose children, or we lose work, and you know, it's hard to be living, you know. So, and we probably, at least many of us, will have a genetic risk also for getting anxious or being depressed. So mental health problems are, you know, it's as common as the flu, and we can sort of reduce the prevalence maybe, but so far it's we have not really succeeded to reduce the prevalence. But obviously there's a potential for preventive and maybe wellness promoting efforts. But I think we have to realize that that mental health problems is sort of a part of life as well.
Ragnhild,
I wanted to ask you something, because I know that you have done some research on this. There are certain genetic aspects that might predispose people to committing suicide or to mental disorders. Are there any genetic aspects that can predispose people to happiness?
Really? I mean, there are no human characteristics, I think, that are not influenced by genetic factors. There was a huge meta-analysis last year based on, I think, 17 million twins around the world, and exploring several thousand human characteristics, and finding most of them moderately influenced by genetic variation. So it is easier for some people to be happy than for others. But obviously we are always influenced by where we are, who we are with, what we are doing, and also, you know, our genetic makeup. But I think the strongest genetic effects seems to be on that sort of stable happiness component, because there seems to be some stability to happiness. Some people tend to be happy at one time point and also at another time point, and they are happy at work, and they are happy at home and in the gym, and in the street, in the car. So they have this sort of propensity to feel happy or look upon their life circumstances as, with a positive outlook. And this propensity seems to be quite much influenced by the genetic factors. And in our studies, and you mentioned earlier today some American studies, we find that about 80% of the stability component is down to genetics. But this is not because you have genes that sort of determine your happiness through life, but the way genetic factors tend to work, I think, is to pulling us towards certain life experience or arenas in life. I mean, we are not exposed to a random environment. I mean, a sort of a happy child, a sociable child would seek, sociable and interesting circumstances and meet people that sort of respond positively to his or her smiling and sociability. So it will be this niche building over time or through life where genetic factors are sort of pulling us towards the environment, and then, so it's sort of this interplay through life between the genetic factors and the environmental factors. But when it comes to molecular genetics, we know very, very little. There's a lot of research on molecular genetic research using a lot of different research strategies today, and still we know infinitesimal. It's just almost nothing about what particular genes, and it's probably so many complex ways that genetics or, single genes will influence our happiness. I mean, there's a long way from a single gene to this, unique experience, this magic feeling of, being completely content in life. I mean, it's quite a distance.
Enrique,
how are you doing with your work? Let's just check out what Enrique is doing with his drawings. I would like you to see yourselves as Enrique has drawn you, but please don't portray me. Show the pictures that you've made of them. I like that you've portrayed them with a big smile. This is what we need to have today, all these big smiles. I see that Enrique is very happy also while he does his work. There are words that you have used in your speeches, and Meik, you use it a lot in your books, and that word is community and the power of communities, and the way that in Nordic countries communities work very well and in a very natural way, fulfilling everything from these community spaces, the way you use bikes in the Nordic countries, the way you share the leisure time with a hygge at home, which is something very advisable to do.
What always comes up in the studies and the data sets is the importance of our relationships. And that's whether we look at the sort of the short term, the long term of sense of purpose when it comes to happiness. So I usually say, if we can't ask people directly how happy they are, I would ask them how happy they are with their relationships, because that gives us a pretty good indicator of where they are. Of course, there's a lot of factors that impact how I evaluate my life and how I feel, but across generations, across cultures, across countries, we can see that relationships are important. And I think that's also one of the wonderful things, in my view, with happiness research, that when you dive into these things and you look at the data and you look at the evidence and you have conversations with people like we have today, but also across the world, you see that, yes, we are Norwegian or Spanish or Danish, but we're first and foremost humans. And we can see that there are so much more that unites us than what divides us. And I think that is a wonderful thing to acknowledge, especially in these days. So when it comes to relationships and how to create that sense of community, that sense of togetherness, I'm really interested in, again, how can we create good conditions for relationships to strengthen and happen. And I think one of the fun cases I've seen was a Danish boarding school that was annoyed with all the kids. I'm sure it's like this in Spain as well. All the kids are on Instagram and Snapchat and whatnot. And they were chatting with people back home instead of with the people they were at the boarding school with. So what the boarding school did was, at the beginning of the semester, when the students arrived, all the phones, all the devices were taken. And then the students could have them 1 hour per day and go on Snapchat and do what they wanted. 1 hour per day. And then after 6 months, it was put to a vote among the students, should we continue with this system or should everybody get their phone back? And 80% voted to keep the system in place. Because they experienced, well, if none of us have our phone, we actually create a community with the people we are with. And that might be an extreme experiment. I'm sure now all the young people are looking horrified in the audience. But I think it's interesting. It's a new technology to us, and we still need to figure out how do we use this technology, I think, in a better way. And of course, we shouldn't abandon the technology. It's here to stay. It has a lot of good uses as well. But maybe we need to figure out, around dinner time in our families, in Denmark it would be earlier, it would be between 6 and 8. Maybe that's the no phone time. And maybe some streets can come together and say, listen, on Fridays, we have no phone Fridays. And everybody who has kids, they send the kids out to play like I used to do when I grew up. And I think it's coming together and creating a coordinated effort to figure out how do we create good conditions for community to flourish.
Este concepto...
This concept of trust, the community is very much connected to the trust factor that you mentioned in your speech before. When you find the support of a whole community of the neighbors, like when you can leave your children out in the trolley outside of the street, or you can leave your bike without any chain, that makes us all feel in a more relaxed environment and more trustworthy, more full of trust.
Extremely important. I mean, for the Nordic countries, and I was thinking when Mike was talking about trust earlier today, and a lot of people around the world think that Scandinavians are very naive, when they answer, yeah, it's quite likely that I will get my wallet back. But in fact, it will be returned, and you said in 100% of the cases it will be returned, and when you can trust people, it just creates a completely different atmosphere. Trusting the other people, trusting the institutions, the sort of political system or the judicial system, whatever it is, and sort of trust is sort of related to not having less corruption, of course. So trust between people and between institutions and people, I think. Exceptionally important and a major factor why the Nordic countries work so well and people are so happy or happy, at least satisfied with their lives. And I think all these, you talked about all these social factors, and it's the trust level, it's sort of belonging, it's having support, giving support, participating, all these different aspects of social life that are so important and that we will focus on in our measurement system, to sort of try to measure all these types of important social factors, because the social, apart from the genetic factors, I guess the clearest finding in happiness research is the importance of your social connections. Yeah.
Before I leave the floor to our the people who are going to ask you questions, I would like to show you something that is made by Marina Roa. Do you have any tricks to increase happiness on a day-to-day basis? Any trick that you can provide us with so we can be happier on a day-to-day basis? First of all, I would advise to read Meik's books. But do you have any trick or advice that you could give to the audience here today?
I think it's...
Well, yeah.
No, sorry, go on. Please.
No, if we backtrack to the social aspects or being connected, and I think the most important. I mean, we are happy with other people. We have different needs, of course, for how much we spend, how much time we spend with others. But most people generate a lot of happiness doing good things with and for other people. So to spend time investing in your relationships, at work or in the family or in the street or in your community, I think is the most important we can do. We can also be, physically active, keep learning new things, develop our strengths. But I think the relationships are the most important. I do.
Meik, ¿algún consejo?
Meik, do you have any other advice aside from biking? Because I don't know how to bike. I know that it's wonderful, but I don't know how to do it.
Advice. I really agree with Ragnhild. Do something active, do something meaningful, and do something together with other people. That is always a good, I think, recipe. And of course, it's difficult to say something universal. This is what all people should do. But pursuing meaning, pursuing strengthening our relationships, that are some of the things that seems to be universal, applicable. I think it's one thing that could be interesting for all people to do is to become more aware of under which circumstances they feel happy, and let that be the guide. And there are different studies that show that either gratitude journals where you write down perhaps once a week what you're grateful for, or happiness journals where you keep track of your happiness levels and see what characterized those days where I felt good, and let that be the guide in terms of how you design future days and how you architect or design in your life going forward. I think that is also a universal good thing to do. What I've tried to do also, I think it's a wonderful thing being a happiness researcher, because you read all these things, so obviously you start to think, how do I design a good life for me? And how do I make better choices that lead to larger levels of happiness? And two of the things I've done is to sort of invest more in my relationships and build up a stronger sort of friendship circle. And one of the things I write about in I think one of the books is the supper club I've created, where we meet once in a while and have different people. We of course have one host, but instead of like a traditional supper party where he or she is in charge of everything, then we decide on a theme. We've done Mexican food, we've done things with duck, and we've done, we tried to make sausages from the ground up at one time, which was a horrible result, but it was a really good evening. But so everybody comes with ingredients to create one dish under that theme. And then we cook together. And I think especially men, we like to do things when we're talking. Instead of just sitting down in front of each other and talking, I think that conversation actually flows better when we are engaged in something. And it's a really nice way to organize these evenings, because there's not one host with all the responsibility. So it's a very low stress, informal way of being together, where we cook and spend a few hours cooking, and then we eat sometimes good food, sometimes horrible food. But that's one of the things I've tried to do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Voy a poner deberes para este fin de semana.
I'm going to put some homework. So you don't make any sausages, because Meik has said that they're very difficult. Have a good wine if things don't work, and well, just in case. So do you have any other piece of advice?
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of do what you enjoy, obviously, and develop your strengths and find, what works for you, but also to not only identify what brings you happiness, but what steals your happiness, what is robbing you of happiness, because we probably have, bad habits or vulnerabilities or that's a sort of robbing us of happiness, and just doing a lot of what you're really good at will give you a very big, sort of happiness muscle. You know, you play tennis all the time and you get really engaged and happy about it. But then you can get quite imbalanced in a way, because often we do things that creates unhappiness for us, and to also identify those things and do less of those, I think is very important.
Es que hay que darse cuenta cuando uno es feliz.
You need to realize when you're happy.
Of happiness research, you see these happiness traps, and you also become aware of when you've fallen into them. And one of the traps is, of course, the social comparisons that a lot of us make. We are social beings. We compare ourselves to each other. And what we can see is often, for example, when it comes to income, but also a lot of other things in life that we care about our position in the hierarchy. So when it comes to income, in a lot of Western countries, people care more about their relative income than their absolute income. And of course, today, with social media, we are bombarded with great news that happens for everybody else. And it becomes very easy to become aware of how fantastic everybody else's lives seems to be. So maybe also steering clear of that, or stop trying. It's difficult, but perhaps trying not to compare ourselves to other people, and perhaps considering, looking back 5 years, can I improve how my life is today? And looking 5 years ahead, what do I need to change in order to have better conditions for the life that I actually want?
Si os parece, le voy a dar paso a...
Okay, so if you agree, I'll give the floor to the Martians, because, well, we have started to talk about the pieces of advice, and I see that they have the mic. Good afternoon, thanks for the mic. Well, once I knew the topic of today was to conduct a survey among my relatives about happiness. One of the questions was that they should give a synonym of happiness. And I was surprised for how many people said ignorance or a similar word. This recalls that there's an expression in Spain that says, if you don't see anything, your heart doesn't feel any pain. So if you don't see the bad things, you don't feel bad. So what do you think about ignorance and happiness? Who dares first?
No, go ahead.
I think there's a similar, it's a great question, and I think there's a similar expression in English with ignorance is bliss. And we also talked a little bit before, backstage. Of course, there's an element of truth in that, also linking into what we talked about before with the comparisons. And I told you about the experiment or the studies they've done in India, where they introduced a television set to a village that have not earlier had a television set. And suddenly people see in a village, how do the middle class, for example, live in Delhi or Mumbai or other places in the world, and their frame of reference, their reference point in terms of what is possible within a life, the ladder that Ragnhild showed earlier, suddenly gets additional steps. And that can actually mean, even though that their horizons now is widened, even though they are more aware of what happens in the world, then their satisfaction levels can actually drop, because suddenly there's a bigger span of what is possible in life. So in that sense, you could say that ignorance can be bliss, but is it what we want? Would we rather have that life than knowing what is possible? I don't have the answer for that one. That's for philosophers, I think.
Ragnhild, lo dejamos a los filósofos.
Should we leave it to philosophers, or do you want to give an answer? Should we leave this to philosophers, or do you have any answer for Edna?
Right now, I think we should leave it for the philosophers. I'm a bit curious that you said that many of your relatives would come up with that synonym or that. Yeah? What do you think about it?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I think not knowing about anything maybe vale, que igual
When you don't know about anything, maybe you can live a happier life, but in order to be completely happy, you need to know what you can be, what you can become, and based on that, to have the options. And if you lose your ability to choose, your happiness will not be complete.
Thank you.
No sé quién quiere preguntar después, Vega.
I don't know who wants to ask the next question. Vega? Since we're talking now, studying happiness, does that make you feel happier? Yes. Studying happiness, does that make you feel happier yourselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe it does in a way. It does give me a sort of a toolbox, at least, you know, knowing about happiness and ways to sort of be happy or so in a way I think it does. But again, it's very difficult to say whether you sort of, it's your, you know, your genetic factors just, you know, led you to start studying happiness or what comes from learning about happiness. But yeah, I do. I think so. And also because I think what really brings happiness to me is to learn new things. You know, there's love of learning and being engrossed in something, you know, just being really engaged or interested in something. So in terms of that, obviously happiness brings a lot of enjoyment and satisfaction and happiness to me.
Meik?
To me it has. I can see now compared to earlier, 6-7 years ago when I was doing another job, I am significantly happier today. And I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing to know or sort of feel that the thing I'm working with today, or what I'm trying to understand, these 3 questions I mentioned before, that's what I want to answer for the next 30 or 40 years. And to have that level of purpose and to have that level of direction. And I think especially when I was your age, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was all over the place. And when I went to university, I changed between history and economics and political science. I wanted to be a journalist like Martha. I would have been a horrible journalist. But I was all over the place. And I think with happiness research, I finally found my shelf, as you would put it in Danish. And it has provided me with a real sort of calm and a sense of direction and sense of purpose, which to me also is a big part of happiness. And the other dimension is also that it's a really rewarding, fun study, field to study. And you know, there's 200 people here today, all trying to answer the same questions that Ragnhild and I are working on a daily basis. And we can have conversations with each and every one of you about what we're trying to solve. And that also provides an entirely new dimension to everything you experience. Because the conversation we had with you earlier, the conversations we had over breakfast, when we walk around Madrid, when we see kites in the sky over Delhi, that becomes pieces in a big puzzle that we're trying to solve. So suddenly everything gets this extra dimension of experience, which I think is a really fun and rewarding thing to have.
En un momento le voy a dar la palabra.
I will give the floor to Andrea in a minute, but taking this question by Vega, we've mentioned how important it is to identify happiness so that we don't miss the opportunity. And you have highlighted the memories and identifying in our memory these moments in time when we were happy, how important memories are. And Meik even happens about making memories for the future to prepare moments that are moments that can be remembered happily.
It's actually something I'm researching now, and I think it's interesting you mentioned it. I've really been interested in understanding why do we remember what we remember. I mean, why do some things stick and why doesn't things? Why do you remember the kites over Delhi? Why do I remember the smell of grass that was in the field of the summer cabin where I grew up? And why do I hardly recall anything in 2008, right? And I think that's really interesting. And also, and this is one of the complexities and challenges with happiness research, is that we can see there is a difference between the experiencing self, how we experience this moment, and the remembering self. How do we remember things afterwards? So some of you probably know the scientist called Daniel Kahneman, who have written a recent book also called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he's a psychologist like Ragnhild, but he won the Nobel Prize in economics because of that distinction. And what he showed was that people remember things differently from what they experience them. And I think that whole dynamic is super interesting to try and understand. And also then, once we get a better grasp of what makes memories, especially good memories, stick, how do we then cultivate those conditions? I think that's super interesting.
Sobre la importancia de los recuerdos.
About the importance of memories. Do you want to share anything about the importance of memories?
No, I think it's very difficult to add something additional to what Meik said, actually. But I think how we remember things will be very much influenced by where we are now too. You know, I don't know why you don't remember 2008, what happened then. But sort of our life story is sort of constantly changing, and how we look back upon things. And then in 10 years, maybe there are sort of other memories that will sort of capture your attention, or that you will look back on in a way. But it's very interesting, the Kahneman research, and how we sort of remember things so differently, and the importance of, you know, studying different aspects of happiness, about, you know, the experiencing self, which is so different in a way, and you know, influenced by very different drivers or experiences also. Yeah.
Deberes para el fin de semana, además.
I have homework for you for the weekend and for tonight, is to have a list of your happy memories. And Andrea has a question to ask. My question is, there are many companies such as Coca-Cola that have sold themselves as being the ingredient of happiness, or the creation of the Institute of Happiness, but what do you think about selling something so personal and so subjective as happiness?
You talk about the ethical aspects in a way, or yeah? Oh, that's a very tricky one.
Yeah.
Era la última.
It's, I mean, I think Don Draper said it in the series Mad Men, that advertising is about one thing: happiness. And some, as you mentioned, are quite explicit about it in what they promise. You know, Coca-Cola is open happiness, or McDonald's is Happy Meal, or Illy, the coffee brand, says live happily. And some are more sort of subtle. But I think that's what all, I think the character Don Draper is right. I think that is what all marketing and advertisements promise: happiness. But the thing is, we have reached probably peak stuff for happiness. Additional things is probably not going to improve how we feel about our lives. It's also been interesting to see, for example, with hygge, that became quite popular globally, to see how companies have suddenly started to hygge wash different products. Suddenly, this was the most hyggelig glass you could buy. And this was the ultimate hygge aqua. So I think it's the law of the jungle. It's when something becomes popular among people, then suddenly companies will enter that sphere. The same thing happened with yoga. The same thing is happening with mindfulness now. Then if there's something people is interested in, companies are going to enter that stage. And people are interested in happiness, and you will have companies moving in and promising happiness in different shapes, but it's not often, or it's often sold separately.
I opened today this cupboard in the hotel. You have the same hotel like me. Did you open the cupboard and see the happiness pills?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. These candies.
Yeah.
It's a jar really packed with candies, and it says happiness pills. And of course, happiness sells. It's everywhere in the advertising, in the women's magazine, in the men's magazines, in the recipes of how to become ultimately happy and forever happy. And it's probably something we sort of can't, stop. But I do think it's quite, disturbing in a way that happiness becomes associated with all these pleasures. Pleasures, or these moments of positive affect, or these pleasurable experiences, certainly have a health effect on us. It works as an antidote to stress, for example, against stress. And to have those moments are good for us. But pleasures can also become an addiction and take focus away from what matters in life, or other types of happiness. So I am concerned about the association between all these very transient, pleasurable type of objects or experiences and happiness.
La sonrisa de Andrea en la cara lo dice.
Andrea's smile on her face speaks very loud. Enrique is turning to her to see her smile. Enrique, please show us your last drawings. Yes, we are all smiling. We're talking all the time, but yes, we look smiling. And we've been speaking and talking a lot today. Enrique, you're a real artist. Everybody at school asked him for his notes because he took notes greatly. So I'm just going to ask you to have a smile on your faces and recommend that you read Meik's books, that you all do what we have said about the sausages and roast chicken, meatballs, whatever it is, but that we can all share. There's a meatball recipe in his book that is really wonderful, and I advise you to think about the benefits of happiness on your health. And the Nordic countries are just around the corner, so we can also travel there to see in person what the Danish, the Norwegian, the Finnish do to be so happy. I hope we made you happy today. We have been ourselves. A big applause for our speakers.